entering into this magic circle and really kind of understanding that something is different here. There's a new world. Well, isn't that what we need to be thinking about right now? Don't we need to reinvent some of our broken stuff? And I'm saying that generally. I could get down to specifics about economies, about value, about the environment, about climate, about we have some broken things, divided people, right? So we have broken things, and I'm really an advocate for using games as a one place at least to experiment and try something different and try something new.
Hey there, Nick here at Human Restoration Project. We all grew up playing games. I fondly remember playing Go Fish with my grandma and her next door neighbor. As a 90s kid who grew up with an NES, it felt like every console generation was a leap forward in graphics and game quality. And regardless of who you're cheering for, tomorrow's World Cup final will be watched by an estimated 2 billion people. Even though at some point many of us stop playing games, even if we don't stop paying attention to them, we hold on to the experiences, the feelings, and the lessons, what they taught us about ourselves, each other, and the world around us. And it's because games play an important role in human development and tell us so much about societies and cultures at large. The relationship between play, games, and learning has always been a focus of our work. And it's been the lifelong interest of my guest today, game designer, artist, author, and researcher, Dr. Mary Flanagan. Mary Flanagan is the founder of Tilt Factor Game Studio, whose tabletop and digital games intentionally tackle a number of social issues. The tagline on the Tilt Factor homepage reads, "Game design for social change," with the challenge, can you make a more just and equitable world with games? At Tilt Factor, we believe we can. Mary has also co-authored several incredible books, including the pivotal Critical Play about radical game design, and co-authored Playing Oppression, the legacy of conquest and empire in colonialist board games. So, given Mary Flanagan's unique and consequential focus, I wanted to sit down with her to see what we can learn at the intersection of play and critical pedagogy. Dr. Mary Flanagan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Nick, for reaching out. It's nice to meet you.
I think a lot of people might call your bio artist, author, got academic work, game designer. They might call that living the dream. So how in the world did you come to make game design the focus not just of social change and artistic expression, but academic analysis as well?
I blame my ADHD.
So there's hope for us yet, is what you're saying. There's hope.
That's correct. You know, I never could decide on any particular path because I like to do so many things. And I've just spent my life doing that. The things, one question leads to another. Sometimes things end up being books, and you share an idea through books. Like, for example, Playing Oppression arose from archival research I was doing. I was at the Getty Museum and I stumbled across these really weird historical games that I thought, oh, wow, these actually are doing a lot more than just your simple roll and move around the track thing that I had unfairly kind of categorized them in my head as this like, oh, well, those are really simple games for simpler times. And whoa,
the goose game and all that,
Yes, the game of the goose, bad on me, because of course, as soon as you like, oh, that, those game mechanics aren't really complicated. Well, that kind of thinking will never stand because history always has things to teach us.
Yeah, I was just looking at like the BGG top 100 or whatever. I guess I was just looking at that whole list and I saw that on the very bottom, like ranked 30,382 is Chutes and Ladders, which I'm making the connection now. Like in Playing Oppression, you talk about like the importance for religious instruction of, the cultural importance of snakes and ladders or whatever it was called in its own historical context. And I'm thinking, my gosh, yeah, removed from all of that, mechanically, yeah, it's going to be on the bottom of the BGG 30,000 or whatever. So just a wild, again, ADHD connection. My brain just made something you talk about in your book there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a classic example of how you can be a detective in going into history and really understanding about how, oh my, a game that was about contemplation, snakes and ladders, and moral vices, and thinking through different religious practices, by the way, of the Indian subcontinent. There are Gyan Chowper boards actually in representing Muslim, Jain, and Hindu faith. So, like the format was used across several religions to kind of think about spiritual enlightenment. And wow, that was completely stripped of any meaning and cultural context as it was appropriated during the British colonization, when things could just be taken and repurposed and packaged and sold.
Yeah, and now you can get enlightenment for $10 at Target or whatever.
Yeah, there's no enlightenment there. To be fair, I will say even simple games like Game of the Goose, where you're rolling, and a Euro gamer might say, "Well, this is not for me. This is not my kind of game." It's all chance. This is the worst. Where's my meaningful choice? But on the other hand, they served as a lot of purposes. They were about enculturation. They were things to talk about. They were subject. People weren't bombarded by the internet. So these gave a focused point of a conversation. People could spend time arguing and debating. There's Game of the Geese. Like, I have this really great book, a very thick book that was from the 1950s, where a French scholar collected a lot of Game of the Geese. And there are games on shoes. In the 18th century, you can go play all about different shoe styles and fashion and wigs and all these. So, and as well as politics and literature was represented in this. So the themes actually were a way in which group interactions were being designed, but in a very different focus on mechanics.
Putting on my social studies teacher hat, so I taught high school history for 10 years or whatever. And I as I was reading through your book, I was thinking, God, I would love to just get my hand on a copy or something of those games as something of like a primary source, or like a historiographical,
Yes.
artifact, so that students could play through to see how people at the time understood concepts, or they saw themselves from the role of, the colonists. Or, my goodness, I loved the small section on like how we get like the modern German Euro game today is like them fleeing from, the war games of the past, is how we get, the Knizias and I guess everything else today. But the ones that depict, the German expansion and conquest, and depict, the racial differences and everything else, just that to really seal the deal on how enculturation, to use your word there, how enculturated those things were through play in all of these different cultures, for better and for worse in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it is fascinating how we don't necessarily, as players of contemporary modern board games, we don't always think about the roots of the thought behind it, right? Like, why is strategy so important? Well, strategy was very important in Prussian war games, and really linking to past to the past. But it also shows you what other kinds of biases are built into our current games, beloved games that we have. For example, often they're just like infinite resources in a game. Okay, I need more wood in my settler, in my Catan, right? I need more wood. I got to go find more wood. Well, that no one's taking a round to grow. This is one of the reasons I like Agricola, for example, because you have to actually wait for the little sheep to multiply. There are ways to bring mechanics that are a little bit different, but really questioning my whole thought about games and my art practice actually is looking at play and power. How do we approach power-laden situations, everyday life, the internet, which started off as this utopian, first it started off as military safeguards, and then it became this utopian place, and then now it's like this dystopian data stealing systemic blight.
It's a nightmare. Yeah.
Yes, I read a lot of Cory Doctorow, of course. So yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
which I think it balances out like I don't know, knowing more about that makes me more angsty and upset, but also his take on it is both like humorous and like empowering. So I like his take on it too. Sometimes it can be a little bit too doomer for my taste, some of that critique, but Dr. O threads the needle pretty well.
Yes, there's a new one out. I've just started. I don't know where it is, but there's a new one about the centaur and whether AI is being used for the human or whether the human is being used for the AI. And so there's this. He's trying to get more nuanced, I think, about this kind of thing. So to be determined. But the whole, the context of play in this particular moment is both rife and it's also urgent. Because we need to be able to look at, I mean, what the most interesting thing I think about games are the way that games model not only player interactions, they give us a structure for player interactions, but they give us a logic of a whole world. So we enter into this world. Johann Huizinga, Magic Circle. I know some people don't like that, but I'm totally into it because he's the first person who ever talked about magic and games. Ha ha ha. Anyway, like entering into this magic circle and really kind of understanding that something is different here. There's a new world. Well, isn't that what we need to be thinking about right now? Don't we need to reinvent some of our broken stuff? And I'm saying that generally. I could get down to specifics about economies, about value, about the environment, about climate, about we have some broken things, divided people, right? So we have broken things, and I'm really an advocate for using games as a one place at least to experiment and try something different and try something new. And I think if we have a whole bunch of gamers trying to invent new mechanics and thinking about new economies, and it's a really interesting time, I think, to be able to invent this kind of new way of thinking. And it can start with a game because games reflect culture, but also games are designed. So can we use games to impact the world around us? I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah. Well, I think what's wild about that is that I don't think people would balk at the idea that we were just talking about these more historical games, that would reflect the greatness of the French Empire or whatever, to enculturate, young people into thinking of these new distant foreign lands or the greatness of the French Empire, wanting to contribute to that. People would say, well, yeah, of course. But then when you take the step to say, well, maybe if we design differently, then we could get both children and adults or whomever, right, thinking differently about systems and wanting to then build them differently in the real world. People will be like, wait, they're just games. They're just, they might put them in a separate category. It's not something that we should take seriously. And one thing I love about Tilt Factor is you guys just wear that on your sleeve. I copied the vision over here for folks to hear, and it says your vision is of an equitable and just world in which challenges such as biases and stereotypes, sexual violence, and unequal access to education and healthcare are eradicated through play. And I think we're getting to I don't know, like something of a thesis here in the first 10 minutes, which is just like, why does this matter so much for us to care about play in this way? This is really where I felt that critical pedagogy and play connection. Why should we care?
Yes. Well, I mean, it's very interesting I'm writing something. I'm writing a lecture that I have to give in another land. And and I've ran across this really great quote from the 18th century Dutch poet Hieronymus van Alphen. My playing is learning, my learning is play, and why should learning ever bore me? So I think play is intrinsically tied to curiosity and wonder and the magic of being alive, right? So that is a positive force. You could have negative forms of play, of course, and people might cite dark play, gambling, whatever. There are other kinds of play other than this kind of utopian rah-rah thing that I'm on. But but I do think that it's an overlooked place for serious work to playfully get people thinking differently. Let us find new ways of seeing through the lens of play.
I guess a quick personal anecdote, when I was thinking about this conversation and thinking about, what's reflected in critical play and playing oppression, like my own tabletop gaming journey with my family, right? I'm pretty new to it. It's something that I got into just as a break from work and screen time and wanting to get them into it, but realizing too that sometimes those were not super positive experiences because they're so competitive. At the end of playing card games or board games or whatever, like there's winners and losers. And like it felt really bad to have, kids or somebody feeling really bad about it. So I was looking into, this whole world of cooperative games. So we got Pandemic, we got Forbidden Island, and I got really into, but the Kinfire universe from Incredible Dream is awesome. I just love everything they do. It's basically all co-op too.
Cool.
So it's just such a cool world to build in there. But right, that I was thinking about that too. Like, how can we have more positive experiences as a family playing games? Because we're all against the same team, taking on different roles, helping each other out, like playing to beat the game and win together. Like that seemed like such a fundamental shift in my way of viewing, I guess, the role that games could play, not just to have winners and losers, but we could all be on the same team, sharing a common experience together instead of somebody walking away feeling salty about it,
You're right. You're right. And I think it's interesting that you talk about that experience of walking away from a game because we don't yet have great language for that. Sometimes you might feel guilty because you did this thing, but ultimately you're happy you won. Some games actually bring out very negative parts of us. So different mechanics and different game experiences actually do have embodied effects. And we know nothing. It's not really been studied as a whole area. Like it's really interesting to look at that. You can even see this over in VR and everything, where people are thinking, VR games they're automatically built for empathy. Well, let's we need research on some of this stuff before we make assumptions, because you would think by seeing in someone else's shoes, it might be really moving, but maybe not, because you are mediated. So there's a lot to be learned about the role of games in our everyday life and the way we learn, the way we see each other, and how we can support each other. So that is why I think that any attempt for people to try experimenting with games, to shift the rule sets, what happens if we try to play this co-op? Well, how do we do that? Well, I don't know. Like, let us play with the rules, because we're really operating under some really old paradigms, for gameplay, winners and losers and a winner take all mentality. I mean, that's all in chess, and that's these are some older games, but some games were not that way, right? And then that might fall into more play than game. So that the line between play and game is also something that I'm very interested in, because some people have very strict rules about that, and I'm not so strict about about it. I mean, if I'm making a commercial product, I have to take expectations of certain genres into account and whatever. But in general, I like to blur the lines and bring play into unexpected places as well.
Yeah, talk more about that distinction, because that's something that you get into, like with critical play. It's just like, well, how do we define, what is play and what is a game? And I guess expanding and contracting those to fit different genres or, form types and things. So where do you see that, or how do you like to play with those confines?
Yeah, I mean, I was really inspired learning about the Fluxus movement, actually, and the Surrealist movement, which I do talk about in critical play. But I learned about these things, and actually, when I was in graduate school, I worked at this computer lab where we were actually digitizing Fluxus materials so that people could interact with them. So they weren't just sitting in a museum, because they were meant to be used, and they were made of ephemeral materials because they weren't special objects they were supposed to be engaged with. And I had no idea what that was. What is this fluxusy thing, And then I realized there was a bunch of artists who are making kind of absurd and interesting and provocative game and play experiences, like looking like sometimes they'd make a box, you open it up, and it's just filled with nonsensical objects, and and it's kind of proposing the question on what is the difference between play and games. Can you make a game out of these playful things?
It's like Dadaist board game design or something.
Yes, so Dada, surrealism, and Fluxus are these moments where you have very interesting eruptions in the blurring of games and play.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I really think they came at very interesting times. If you look historically, Dada was really a reaction to World War One. Surrealism was really in that gap between World War One and World War Two, with the invention of psychology in the mainstream, and like all kinds of development of all kinds of really interesting stuff. And then Fluxus in the 60s and 70s, when you had student protests, empowerment, Vietnam War, at least in the United States. So different histories are forming these narratives as well, right? So being a history teacher, this probably is cool for you. I'm a closet historian myself.
People can't see it. I'm grinning ear to ear because this is hitting the intersection of games, history, again, like pedagogy, play. It's just all right in that wheelhouse. Well, so what do the games, I guess, that we engage with today? You had mentioned VR. My own kids dabble in VR, and it's not a world that is really. I guess what's interesting is it's not very accessible to people without the headset, unlike couch co-op or other things that happen on other virtual gaming consoles or online play or something like that. But have you thought or done any research or writing about what today's games, just like those of the past, said about the enculturation of people and their reflection of values? What do today's games say about that?
Well, I do think we have some borrowed histories that we haven't really dealt with. And I would think that and we touch on this in Playing Oppression, but I've recently been asked point on, what are colonial mechanics that we're using right now? Tell me so I don't have to use them. And so I have to invent something else. I'm like, all right, let's think about this, let's get a list going, and I already mentioned the idea of collecting infinite resources, right? Or worker placement. Is that you could think of it as corporate, like leadership, or you could think of it as slavery, right? So there are lots of aspects of games that really do get adopted, and that's one place to start anyway in this exploration of how culture is reflected, because it's still being reflected. We still inherited, and we're still operating, and capitalism is operating under the laws of extraction that philosopher Nancy Fraser says capitalism is not a economic system, it's a social order. So once we understand that as a social order, that there always has to be someone who's down to have someone up, and that's not necessarily a natural scheme of things. That is actually an invented scheme of things. So when we're thinking about how we can see that in our games, we, as you talked about, like the invention of co-op is a new way of thinking around some of those problems. So that is a very cool thing. So that the rise of new forms of play is something that excites me very much, because it does show how culture and designers are thinking together in this really tricky time where we need creative answers.
Yeah, I love it. Was that reframe? I opened it up to the book because that 4X, which is, gosh, what are all those? Explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. Sort of, God, I mean, when you actually describe what those 4Xs are, it kind of makes that 4X label seem a lot less appealing to me. But you borrow from a game designer in Cherokee Nation, is it Will Thompson, who dubs the 4 Cs: conservation, cultivation, continuation, and competition, kind of keeping, I don't know, a game's got to have some different rules or something, but just a reframe towards, I don't even know, pro-social values or something like that.
Right. Yeah, so that's what my next book is on. Actually, I'm writing a book. Well, it's written. We're just doing the final tweaks. It'll be out next year. I'm writing with my collaborator, Laurel Carney, and we are writing a book for MIT Press again, and it is called Speculative Game Design. So this is where the direction of my work is going, is all right, we've got some problems. How do we keep intervening like the artists did in critical play, right? All of those interesting examples of intervention. This is something I'm very excited about trying to enable other people to do. And here's a funny thing. Like when I started that project, I did not think it was going to take me where it did. And that's what projects do, right? Research is like that. In fact, when I was at the Getty Museum and I started doing games and colonialism, I was actually studying artist books. I was not thinking about games at all. And then, whoops, I can't help but talk about that.
That's
Whoops.
Yeah, just slipped into that.
Whoops. But in this particular case, I started doing research on games for social change and games that are but the most interesting stuff I was finding was in the LARP community. And of course, having done LARP and RPGs, I was surprised that became the mechanics and the kind of interactions that are being invented in those spheres are highly interesting for an idea of social transformation and personal transformation. So this is really a very exciting thing because LARP is it's still, unless you're in the know, it's seen as kind of like boffing people on the in medieval garb, right? But really, the power of these transformative performances and really the attention to personal experience and creation is really awesome. So that the book covers a lot of that territory.
I cannot wait for that. We'll have to have you back on after that book because that is so right up our alley too. I think that point about LARPing and not just that live action role play, but also I think in like that indie TTRPG itch.io space is just so it's got such like a vitality to it. There's just so much life, and I'm always just pouring through and finding like, the aesthetics, the art design, like the whole package built in with mechanics. And I just love, I think the ones that just use like found materials or decks of cards or tarot, or you're going to need, this specific 3 dice because every dice roll is going to be, building you're discovering botany or something in the exclusion zone botanist, or in this one, you're running a tea shop and you need to roll to figure out your customers and meet their orders and everything else. Sometimes I wonder, are all the ideas gone because everybody has thought of everything already, right? But they are these invitations just to, I don't know, take on different perspectives, right? To step outside of yourself and
That's right.
And really and empathize and see the world in different ways. In part because of that magic circle that you had talked about earlier. You're stepping into not just a game with mechanics, but a different way of thinking, about the world and its organization through these mechanisms and the rules and the art experience, I suppose.
That's right. And it also gets us out of the echo chamber that has become the internet, right? The algorithms have not enriched our lives with diverse surprises, logics, and priorities. You know what I mean? Like the people go down their particular community, and sometimes the interesting things are happening on the margins, right? So how do we help the margins become centered? That's something that people have been trying to do for a long time, but there are ways that you can do that. I mean, I remember, I think, reading feminist literature many years ago, and I think it was a big push. Like, how did the marginal critiques actually get to a center where it's helping everybody function as a society? And I think it's really the only. I cannot press enough that it's the only antidote to really losing hope, actually. Because it's when we see people becoming trillionaires and many of us are just don't bat an eye because that's the way things are. That is not the way things have to be. And we have to come up with new ways of really interpreting our unwritten and unspoken assumptions about everyday life, right? And really try to prioritize people, each other, and also interspecies and non-species, right? Our relationship to the earth. I was just writing today about this town in Norway that has since the 80s has had an interspecies council. They completely take every major decision in this town and they think about the water and the fish and the trees and the rocks and the mountain and so they think about the whole picture, which of course we need to do. So there are these cool examples where people are doing it. So let's go find them and let's learn.
Again, that sounds like a wonderful TTRPG game design, which is the interspecies council, right? Like you have to put on the hat and here's a card that has the I don't know, the agenda item or the action item, and you have to put on the hat of all of these.
Actually, there's video. You should look up the Southampton Council because it's in England, and they actually had people dressing up as species coming to the town council. There are people with deer heads on, I'm telling you.
Okay. Was this like in rebellion or resistance, or was this like a built-in part of it?
This is a new way of trying to raise awareness about conversations that need to happen and decisions, new kinds of decisions that have to be made, because of course a non-decision is a decision, right? So, and consumers are not have not felt super empowered to be able to control the supply chain and the destruction of the environment very much. So I think it's a pushback, and it's a playful pushback. There's a lady dressed like some kind of exotic flower, and there's stuff coming off of her head for like 3 feet. So
good for her.
Love it.
Yeah, I would have just gone with like, I don't know, you can get those inflatable animal costumes or something at the Halloween store. Go with
no. These are all handmade, I'm pretty sure.
Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah. I'll have to look that up and plug a link for it for listeners. Well, speaking of plugging it, let's plug in Tilt Factor into this too, because like it feels like we're kind of talking about like around all of these, but again, if the mission of Tilt Factor is to provide a model for doing this, how have you all tried to like live those values and like, I guess, implement or iterate on them in gaming spaces?
Well, so I am, a scholar. I'm writing all these books and stuff, and I'm also an artist making this stuff. And Tilt Factor is a kind of a different aspect of my practice where I work collaboratively with different specialists and students to create and study games that literally address a social issue. So I started working on this stuff in 1999. I got my first National Science Foundation grant for the first internet adventure game for girls, which was called The Adventures of Josie True. And it had math and science activities, and you meet all these historical figures and women, and like Bessie Coleman was in there. And anyway, so it was this cool thing about trying to support especially young girls in science, math, and STEM fields, in part because studies show around 5th grade is where a lot of girls, and I haven't looked this up recently, so at that time, around 5th grade, it was a time when a lot of girls felt like science and math weren't for them anymore. So there's like turning points where you can look at the research data. And so I ended up getting, through the years, working with social psychologists and social scientists, and actually having postdocs in my lab who know how to run a social science study with, randomized control trial, this kind of thing. But we're creating, and then we're testing to see if our creations do anything. So, and sometimes they didn't, right? We have a paper called Failed Games where we talk about this process. But yeah, we've had so many interesting projects over the 20 years that I have. Is it 20 years? I think it's like 20 years-ish. Hopefully it's not more that I've run this game research lab, because, there are a lot of questions to be asked. But like, for example, can you make a game that makes you less biased or less racist? Right? Can you make a game that does something like that? That's a hard ask, right? But we did find ways to do some of this stuff. We did find ways to lower people's scores of like discrimination after playing the game Buffalo for 20 minutes. based on two vetted social science scales of how people measure bias and discrimination. So if you really dig down into the social science as a form of evidence, it gets very interesting in designing from psychological principles. So I had a whole chapter of my existence really enjoying the how much we do know about how people understand the world from psychology. And wow, it's really interesting, like how swayable we are, even when we think our identities are pretty fixed.
Yeah, and putting those in a space, making those things visible and putting them in a space where I guess play is the objective. And we're not necessarily thinking first and foremost about those transformations, but just thinking in terms of the rules of the game. But upon reflection, walking away from it, realizing that we're going to be thinking about, I guess, I'm looking at the summary for Buffalo here, but challenging those biases or hacking those prejudices and those preconceptions about scientists and superheroes, perhaps around race and gender, for example. And I guess playing a game, but changing your biases at the same time and leaving the game differently than when you entered. That's such a cool idea.
Yes, and the interesting thing about it though is that it works better if you're not told that's what's happening.
Okay. So you're just playing, oh, we're going to play a game of Buffalo.
We're going to play a party game. It actually is sold as a party game. It's one of my best-selling games.
Well, that's so interesting because I think too, gosh, when I was a classroom teacher, the way that we approached the issues, of bias, and especially around COVID 2020, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, was like to confront it with like this level of seriousness and this level of like gravitas, that like if you weren't already bought in, to the need to change on those issues in education, I think made it maybe more difficult to do that. And I'm thinking like, is this a way that we can broach hard conversations about challenging personal identity or, socialized biases, like again, through play and games to get to serious issues in healthcare and society and labor relations, as opposed to like your parents sitting down and say, come have a seat, we need to talk kind of thing, and you immediately get your hackles up.
That's right. That's right. It's called psychological reactance.
Okay.
Hackles.
Your hackles. That's what that is. Okay. Good to know.
Your hackles are psychological reactants, and we experience it a lot when we feel like we're being told what to do, and it can actually shut down our interest and ability to process it. And as a teacher, you probably saw this all the time.
It's like a doing to model rather than like a doing with kind of thing, right?
Yes.
The more a person thinks that they're teaching themselves, they're going to be more successful than if they are passive recipients of you as the learned master, They're
Yes,
learn more.
and it is hard because, of course, grave problems do require the gravitas to be humble about them. But on the other hand, then there's an argument to be made about the clearer communication, and really exposing things for what they are, right? But then there's another way to do it. And there is a way to do it that is actually what advertising is doing, and all kinds of, nefarious media makers are doing as well, which is, persuading. These techniques are not only in the social sciences, they're in advertising. Advertisers don't necessarily sit down and say, when you buy this Nike shoe, here are the costs of environmental impact of one shoe. And these many people were only paid this much to work. That's not, they don't really lead with the facts. They lead in a different way to get you to think about stuff. And as we've seen, facts are having a hard time right now. But our feelings are also having a hard time. So, is there a way that we can, yes, bridge somehow through these mutual understandings? I don't know. It's a huge and timely problem, with a divided country, but also even you could say more so in the whole world. It's not just the United States that's having really big differences of opinions on stuff. It is a global phenomenon, but it's really exacerbated right now by technology, echo chambers, hackers.
We need to be the pro-social hackers. We can do social engineering in a positive direction instead of for the worse.
Yeah, I mean, when people ask me, well, if your techniques could be used for good, can't they be used for evil? And I'm like, yes, but they already are.
Yeah, that's you do the Uno switcheroo, right? The reverse card on them is what that is.
Yeah,
It's already bad. We're trying to make it worse.
there's
We're
already,
trying to make it better.
bad, self-image and all kinds of, yeah, we've got challenges galore. So let's figure out ways to keep the conversation going, and really try to have encounters and change our mindsets and be open and not be just in our little dungeon of psychological reactants where we are not changing a thing.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like kind of thinking about that, I remember I think there was a period, I don't know, like again, like the 2010s, maybe through 2020, that decade of where sort of the technology had and the interest in technology, but not necessarily the critical consciousness to rally it effectively had quite landed yet. And I just remember all of these, I don't know, there were sometimes questions on social studies, Facebook groups or something else, like all these different simulations popping up, right? And still you'll get news stories sometimes of teachers who get a lot of trouble because they held a slave auction simulation or something, right? Where they're like role playing the racism that a lot of students already experience in their day to day, a lot of really inappropriate things. And I think that might be an example again of sort of cart before the horse gamification without the critical consciousness. But I wonder if you can think of any other ways that we get wrong about gamification in education that you'd like to see differently. Again, like maybe we could hack in a way, a need to, I guess, infuse some more play alongside a more critical role, for games in education in the direction that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think that one particular direction that has struck me over the years is the power of fiction. And fiction sits uncomfortably for fact-based people. Like, I'm a mathematician. Fiction doesn't really work here. I'm a historian. I don't want fiction about my history. We have to tell the truth. We have to, get to the point. I'm not talking literature studies where fiction is fine, but the power of fiction. And in one project, we had a game, and we reskinned the game to be a zombie game. And it was for public health. And it was like the same kind, it's exactly the same game, but the zombie version engaged people more. And we theorized that it lowered people's psychological reactance because it wasn't about immunity and vaccinations and all these words of everyday life. It was about zombie, vaccination. And you're like, oh yeah, I want that.
Oh, that's such a smart way to do it.
So fiction, so taking some of the structural problems and putting them in a fictional place so we can look at them and not feel implicating our colleagues, our friends, not putting one group on the spot, but making it an objective situation. We've used alien worlds to substitute for frat parties.
Okay, that my imagination has to stretch a little bit for that one, but
well, there are these like future kids who go on a spring break trip, and and it's a project to raise awareness about sexual assault prevention through bystander intervention. But if you tell a bunch of college students, okay, now we're going to do bystander intervention training, of course, some people will be very engaged, but some people will really check out and say, look, this is dumb. This is not for me. I know this already, or whatever they may think. But if you change the context and put it in this weird, alien situation, and you end up having to do bystander intervention, but this is like alien stuff, and you're at a sporting event, and like, so just using fiction is an interesting tool, or at least to experiment with, and not making something right on the nose that might be hurtful.
yeah, and tough for people to process. Like all of the things that we had been talking about with through LARPing and the magic circle, right? It creates safe structures, psychologically safe structures, and physically safe, hopefully, structures for people to explore ideas that they might not otherwise be amenable to. I love kind of bringing those things full circle.
Yeah, yeah. And that is true. Like and the standards that could, the difficulties that could happen in a classroom game, it could also happen, with a LARP where whoever's running the LARP needs to. Luckily, the LARP community has this huge toolkit of safety standards, which is really helpful. But again, if you are not from that community and you try some of these things, you might not really know to bring the toolkit of safety along, right? So it's that's one of the things that I'm trying to do in this forthcoming book is to kind of introduce several different areas, speculative design community with games with the kind of the digital people to role playing and tabletop to acting, and really try to bring that kind of literacy together in this idea of speculative game design.
Oh, that's so amazing. I cannot wait for that. Kind of trying to land the plane here a little bit. I need to know, like, what are games in the tabletop or digital space that you're playing or that you're excited about now? Like, what they could be academic interests or for research purposes, or like, what are you playing? What are you reading? What are you into?
I have this weird set of French animated bingo cards from the turn of the 20th century that
Whoa.
that are like you have these little animations to uncover it, like there's these really cool little paper doll things, and but there's some really unusual caricatures of implying sexual activity and incriminating racial views, and so I want to unpack this whole thing. That's a longer term project. I hauled out my working Dark Tower, and I was jamming with that.
Okay.
I know all the sound effects. I've known them my whole life. It's like very weird.
Like it's like nostalgic for you too, just that
Yeah,
stepping back into that.
I guess so. Well, I'm also interested in that cusp when digital games were fascinating, and that moment when it wasn't. Yeah, I'm interested in that cultural moment actually. And then I have sitting outside my office right here. I have Unconscious Mind,
Oh, cool.
which I am very excited to play. I've wanted to play it for years. I got a demo of it in Essen one year before it was actually kickstarted, and it is just so beautiful. And the linking between at least what I think is going to happen is the linking between the content and the mechanical elements is. I think it looks really tight and very well thought out.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to play that, but we have one of our we're only 3 full-time staff, and one of them, that's her new favorite game. She got it pretty recently. It's her absolute favorite. So
yeah, it's just
hopefully
so
have a good time
beautiful.
with it.
And
Yeah.
being also a professor, it's like like research. You get books and
Oh yeah, well you get to like role play as Freud and Jung, and like at that cusp of like psychology and the metaphysical. It's just such a cool space for play. I love that idea.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. And also I'm I'm a visiting artist at the Nemo Science Museum in Amsterdam. So not this summer, but many times during the year, I go for a chunk of time and I'm making games and dealing with the public in this crazy, wonderful science museum, which is so cool for me because it's a totally different way to meet audiences. Yeah, so I'm working on like kind of like escape roomy things or like more poetic interventions in that kind of space.
Oh man! So you're saying next summer I need to go to the Nemo Museum in Amsterdam so I can go through a Mary Flanagan escape room? Is what you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll get my tickets booked
And
right
team,
now.
I'm not doing that one alone. But
Okay.
yes, there's fun to be had.
Oh, that's
Where would you fly out of?
I would fly out of Des Moines, so that
Oh,
would.
you're in Des Moines.
Yeah. Where are you at? I was thinking about that earlier, like time zone wise.
I'm right now in New Hampshire, but I went to school in Iowa, and I am from Milwaukee. I could hear your
No way.
Midwestern thing. Yes.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Did you go to like U of I or what?
Yeah, University of Iowa. Yeah, I did my MA and MFA there. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say with the writing background, I was just thinking, yeah, the
No, I actually
MFA.
did a film.
Oh, wait. Okay.
Yeah,
Jeez.
I did film. I did film.
That's amazing. Yeah. Go Hawks. Mary, if people wanted to follow up on any of these wild threads that we've been chasing through this conversation, what's the best place that people can, I guess, find or connect with you, connect with your work? Where do they go
Well,
from here?
I'll tell you a few things. First of all, I am still on Instagram under critical.play. I have the research lab, which has some of our studies included in the website and under the research area. That is called tiltfactor.org. And my website, which shows some of my board games and my art games and art playful stuff, is maryflanagan.com. And my game company, Resonym, is resonym.com. And in the last 10 years, we've published 10 board game, card game things. So,
Oh my gosh. I didn't even talk about Resonym.
I know, it's fine.
Is
There's
there
so much to
anything you
talk
want to
about.
mention about that while we have the
You,
time?
you see how great of a capitalist I am.
Yeah, right. You gotta pitch those games. Oh, I apologize. I had the tilt factor thing up, but what's going on with Resonym?
Well, we're actually in a little bit of a hiatus because it's really complicated to be printing right now, and things are so expensive.
Oh, no doubt.
But our games are going all over the place. I think Phantom Ink is now in maybe 13 countries or something like that. So,
I was gonna say, I feel like I've seen this game on the shelf.
well, it wasn't Target and Barnes and Noble and game stores and stuff. It's one of my faves. It's very good.
Oh my gosh. I will have to check that out. Oh, I'm kind of embarrassed now that I just like spaced that out.
No worries. No worries.
We'll have to
Nick.
pick that up for the speculative game
Yeah, we'll
design.
have to pick that up again. We have things to talk about. Things.
We'll have things. All right. Well, my goodness, Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on your cast.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast at Human Restoration Project. I hope this conversation leaves you inspired and ready to start making change. If you enjoyed listening, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast player. Plus, find a whole host of free resources, writings, and other podcasts all for free on our website, humanrestorationproject.org. Thank you.